Good day, everyone, and welcome to the last live stream that I will do this year as we're live streaming across a number of platforms. You're on one of those. And if you're with us live watching this, I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching later, of course, I'm also glad you're here. But if you're with us live, I hope that you will start by going in the comments of whatever platform you're in and saying hello and telling us where you're located. That would be great for my guest and I just to know. But there's another reason that I ask you to do that is because I want you to get used to and willing to share. If we were in a room together having a cup of coffee or a glass of water or whatever your beverage of choice might be based on your time of day, and if we were sitting around having the conversation that you're about to listen into, if you were actually here, if you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you'd share it. If you had an idea, you would offer it, right? So you can do that here through the magic of live streaming. So if you have those questions, comments, and ideas, share them by typing in a comment. I may share them on the screen. We may use them if we can. And if that happens, if you will participate in that way, this will be an even better conversation. And you'll get more from it because you may get your exact questions answered. So that's sort of the intro to the live. Now what I'm going to do is do the countdown, which will be the signal of where we will trim this for the podcast when this comes out on the podcast in a couple of months. So, Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. The world is different. The workplace is different. So it holds that work must be different. Yet, as we all work and live through these differences, we need to see a bigger picture to help us get better results. Today, we're talking about truths and principles that will help us see that bigger picture, step back, and they will help us work different and win bigger. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, you could join us in the future for live episodes and get the information sooner. We'd love to have you do that. And if you want to know when they're happening and where to join us, you can go to our Facebook, join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. And here's how you can find those. You can just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get in on all the fun and join us live in the future. Hope you'll do that. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses. Pick from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of a leader's toughest challenges. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. And with that, I'm going to bring in our guest. If I can get my screens moved around here. His name is Ilya Bonic. He is our guest. Let me introduce him, and then we will dive in. Ilya Bonic is an Aussie native who is based in New York. He brings a global executive's view to his work. As Mercer's head of strategy, he worked with the leadership team to secure Mercer's business continuity response to the pandemic. He is similarly focused on Mercer's business evolution as we adopt various generative AI tools to augment our own workforce, enhance our business competitiveness, and continue to make an ever-increasing positive impact for clients. He told me a few minutes ago he's been at Mercer for 26 years, and he is the co-author with 2 of his colleagues of the new book, Work Differently, 10 Truths for Winning the People Age. Welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Kevin. What a fabulous introduction. And what I liked most about it was how you said Aussie.
Well, I don't know did I say it right? I don't know.
I would say Aussie.
Oh,
but you're close.
See, there you go. See, we're already off on a bad start, everybody. Except you're smiling at me if you're on the podcast.
I think it's a very human way to
speak. I think we're good. I've shared the bio, right? We sort of generally know that you've been at Mercer a long time, working in the organization, working with clients, and yet that's really only part of the story. And so, as I know that you know, because you've listened to other episodes, I often ask this question, like, tell us about your journey. And I guess really what I'm saying is sort of, how do you end up doing this kind of work? Because when you were 10, you weren't thinking you'd be doing this. You didn't know this kind of work even existed, right? So, like, how do you sort of end up where you're at?
I at 10, I did not know I want to do this. My dad was a steel fabricator. He ran his own business, and whenever I misbehaved as a teenager, he used to take me to work with him and have me clean steel just to discourage me from following in his footsteps. I studied psychology in university or college, as you call it here, and I wanted to do drug and alcohol counselling. I did an internship and quickly worked out it was super interesting work, but why are the same people coming back week after week after week and they don't seem to be any better? And so very quickly I worked out I like this work. I could see the impact that I could have, but I think I'd be burnt out after a couple of years of not seeing as much progress that I'd like. So I shifted my study to organisational psych, and then moved into a career there in a space that was in Australia, we say remuneration consulting.
Yep.
I didn't even know how to pronounce the word. I walked up to my first interview and I said, I'm here for the remuneration consultant interview. Anyway, I got that. Joined a small business, became a partner very quickly. I have a kind of creative bias to my work. That business was acquired by Mercer, and then Mercer's given me terrific opportunities to work in Australia, in Asia, in Europe, and now here in the US. It's just been an incredible ride.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're here. And the book is called Work Different. So I thought we'd start there.
Yeah.
What do you mean by work different?
Yeah, I could say, give you a boring response to that and say something like, world of work's changed forever. People issues are more complicated. Businesses can't succeed without people. And that's all true.
Yep.
But what took us down the path of writing this book was the experience we had with our clients, but also as consultants running our own business. I'm one of the executives at Mercer, and the same kind of people pressures that everyone has experienced over the last few years, I mean, I've been dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But maybe I'll just share a story to give you an insight into some of the things that we've been seeing. It starts off at an airport. And have you ever been delayed at an airport?
Well, if you've flown more than 3 times in your life, you have been delayed. Yes, I have been delayed.
Have you ever overheard a conversation that you shouldn't have while you're waiting at an airport?
I'm sure that I have. I'm not thinking of any of them in the moment, but yes, I'm confident that I have.
So here's one. Kai and I, my colleagues who wrote the book, are at an airport taking a flight together, flight's delayed, and we hear, which had to be a very senior HR executive, super frustrated on the phone to one of their colleagues. And the conversation goes something like this, way too loud because we could hear it, but we couldn't help but listen because it's in our space. And it was like, so it was just this frustration, like we're losing all of this talent. It's like we bring the best people into our business, we train them up. That's what attracts people to our business. That's what they like. But then 2 or 3 years later, they're off to our biggest competitors. And at this stage, the executive names these companies as well. Again, a little too loudly. They go into it in a bit more detail, and they go, I kind of get it. It's like we bring them in on this with this promise of training and development on this great base salary, but the benefits are terrible or average. We don't give them any incentive pay. We don't give them any long-term incentive. We got rid of the retirement plans years ago. There's nothing really here to keep them. So 2 to 3 years in, we've got some of the best talent in the industry. We've trained them and they leap and they go into bigger jobs, higher paid, with all of the things that we're missing. And the thing that really caught our attention was, like, they said, I don't blame them for leaving. I totally get it. What really frustrates me is the people that don't go, the people that stay behind. Either they're not confident enough to pursue that other opportunity, or they're not good enough to get that other opportunity.
Right. The market's not saying they're ready, right?
So how are we going to win if we don't have the best talent in the business? And right, that was, I know this has always been an issue, but in that period from 2020 to now, it's just been magnified. And the way organizations look at this, the way employees look at this, the mindset, the way competitors look at it, it's all changed.
It's all different.
That kind of scenario that's prompted us to kind of look into these issues in a bit more detail and start to think about work must have changed. It has changed. Here are some different ways that we can think about work as we go forward to be able to make better decisions.
You know, in my work, much like yours, and also in doing this podcast, I clearly read a lot. And so, you know, most of us would say, well, we've lived through, or in our history, there is the industrial age. Most have said, well, then we had the information age.
Yeah.
And in the last year, I've read a whole bunch of people with different next ages, right? I've heard the wisdom age. I've heard the context age. You guys call it the people age. Yeah. And I want to talk about that in a second. But the reason that I preface it with all of that is that it's all about the same point that you just made, is that there is so much tumult, and there's so much going on, and there's so much uncertainty, and there's so much complexity that we're all trying to lift our eyes up enough to say, well, yeah, it's really changed. And it's not just the individual things that have changed, but the whole paradigm has changed. You guys call it the people age. Why the people age?
We call it the people age because I think we discovered through COVID in particular that work just can't get done without the people. Be it before we went digital, be it when we went digital and we couldn't come to the office and we had to rely on our people to do the work without necessarily a lot of guidance. In fact, I think the guidance was often coming from the people to the managers.
In the best organizations, it definitely was.
And then now with the emergence of AI, I mean, you could argue and say, hey, this is the age of AI, but it's not going to work. It's not going to have an impact unless the people are making decisions using that technology and applying it for productive ends to get whatever outcomes required. And so that's why we're calling it the people age, is I think there's been a greater realization that the heart of success in business is the people. And also, if we're going to be successful through our people, we need to get the balance right, because their expectations of what they want from work, what they want for their careers, that's changed as well.
It's changed because they've seen a picture of possible, right?
Yeah.
In some cases, and they're dealing and struggling with all of this change as well on a personal and individual level, as well as in an organizational and career level. So you mentioned AI. We'll get there, I think, probably before we're done a little bit. But the book is really organized around these, what you call the 10 truths. And I don't want us to just sort of list off the 10.
Yeah.
Like, listen, everybody, you need to go buy the book. Then you can get all 10. So I'm going to pick a couple. We're going to talk about a couple of them along the way. But before we do that, I want to say one more thing about this idea of the people age. Everything that you just said is sort of profoundly true. And yet all of those things that you just said about the people, except perhaps the last thing about expectations, has always been true.
Right.
So why are we, or why is it so important that we finally actually act on those profound truths?
Yeah. You know, before coming on, I mentioned to you that I downloaded and listened to some of your books, right? And the one you wrote before COVID was about being a long distance manager. And in your 2023 book about leading teams, I think you made a comment along the lines of, you know, COVID didn't make this happen. It just accelerated things.
You guys said the same thing in your book.
Actually. I think, yeah, we're on the same page here. Is like these truths, I guess they're always there. They're just magnified through COVID, and they become so much more important now. And to your other point is like, once you've seen the other side, there's no going back. So there's no choice but to deal with it. I mean, take the conversation that seems to be going on forever is flexible working and return to office. I mean, there's no 5-day week anymore. And if we've compromised on 2 to 3 days, that's still a lot different than we were before. And we cannot go back. And in fact, there were so many organizations, and I think the banks in particular during, you know, just after COVID were like, yes, we're going to get everyone back. Yes, we're going to do this. but they'd always backtrack, because whenever the employees or people, or we call them contributors in this book, had more power or more say, you couldn't do what the talent didn't really want to do. You had to follow the laws of supply and demand. You can't go against the grain that way.
Well, you said something that we've been talking about internally, and Wayne, my co-author in the long distance leader and the long distance team and the long distance teammate, all those have been talking about, and the word that you used is compromise.
Mm-hmm.
I think that many organizations, leaders, and contributors all feel like they're compromising. And so we may end up at something in a year or two that doesn't look that different from where many organizations are now, but hopefully it's going to feel different, because as long as everybody feels like they're compromising, there's going to continue to be this unrest. You want to react to that? Thoughts and comments about that?
Maybe with my business leader hat on, is compromise does not lead to outstanding performance, right?
But isn't that how a lot of people feel about
average? It leads to ordinary. And so there's another thing just about the book is like, yes, there's these 10 truths. I'm glad we're not going through each of them, because the way I like to think of it is, have it as a reference to your side. When you come across an issue, just flick through, is there a chapter that might inform something different? Or if you've got an issue, for example, like that airport scene that we shared, use it to diagnose the issue in a different way, and then maybe respond. And then it's the same thing with this compromise. All right, work with it, understand the issue, but at some stage, an organization needs to make a decision around the direction it's going to go, the values it's going to have, what its strategy is going to be, and move on. It just needs to be more informed to make the right decision. But
it probably needs to be more holistic than many have. You know, we said early and during and post pandemic, we said stop writing policy and start doing pilots, or trying stuff, right? Pilot, not policy. And I think that many organizations really still need to be thinking that way. And if they will, they'll be doing some of the things that you're talking about in this book. There's another thing that you said earlier. You were talking about as contributors. And again, one of the truths, everybody, and Ilya mentioned it, is this idea of we're not employees, we're contributors now, and thinking about it differently. But as contributors have seen a different way of working, and have seen even a different way of their leaders leading, that it's hard to go back. And I think one of those areas, it's actually one of the truths about empathy. The idea that I believe that one of the good things that came from the pandemic is that many, many leaders figured out that they needed to lean into empathy. And many did. Right. The challenge now is, it's not like a switch we should be flipping off, but rather a skill set and a habit set and a mindset that we continue. You want to comment? I mean, I really wasn't planning for us to talk about that truth, but since it sort of showed up, you want to say anything? I don't have a lower third to put up about empathy and accountability, but do you want to say anything about that?
It's right. If we went into the COVID crisis as employees, the moment the world stopped turning, we went digital to continue work. Leadership lost control of the business, right? Or how do you control a remote workforce that you've never had remote before? But somehow it worked, and it didn't work because we had brilliant leaders. They were still the same leaders going into that crisis as the one before. But I argue it worked because there was a common purpose, which was essentially for all of us to survive. And behind that common purpose, I think the majority lent in to work in a different and more constructive way than before, with greater tolerance for error, to be able to work out new ways of operating, new ways of working, ways that hadn't been done before, and that whole situation demanded more empathy on all sides. And of course, it helps that it's a health crisis, not necessarily an economic crisis. So I think people just by nature are focused and interested in how others are. It gave the opportunity for this characteristic to come to the fore. I don't think it's ever been more valuable. It doesn't all also, it doesn't, not that I'm a leadership development consultant, but it doesn't come naturally to all leaders as well. And
that's why everyone's here listening to us, right? I mean, you and I are talking, whether it's live or later, to people who care about this enough to invest their time to listen, right? So that's for sure. One of the truths that I think I want you to talk about, again, from the perspective of, we might always have said, well, skills matter, right?
Yeah.
So one of the truths is skills are the real currency of work. So I guess what I'll say is, like, how is this different now than it used to be? Like, tell us what this means. Put the lens of the future on this point for us.
So let me share two stories first to set the scene, and then we can. First one is in the book. We talk about the time when pretty much everyone was out of work, or you had a lot of furloughs, and you had this situation or a dichotomy in the economy, right? One where there are organizations struggling to find talent to do the work, and that would be like stock shelves, stock bottle shops, deliver, whatever. And then you had a bunch of other employers, hospitality and transport, who just had no work at all. Somehow, our colleagues in the executive suite across different competitors and HR in particular found a way to cooperate and start to move talent en masse from areas of low demand in the economy to high demand. We would not necessarily have moved a worker from Marriott overnight to work at Walmart, but we did in this time of need. And I think it started to open up people's eyes as to what the possibilities or what the transferability of skills and knowledge actually were. An example from Mercer is a professional services firm, particularly in the line of business that I'm responsible for that first 3 or 4 months of COVID, our business tanked. I can't think of it.
That's about the best word to use. I know exactly how you feel.
Right. But another part of our business is focused on health. And so we had other parts of our business that actually had high demand in the situation. So picture like one third of Mercer with very little to do and 2/3 of Mercer with a lot to do. In Canada, I remember this example because it sticks to me. Both I'm happy about it and sad about it. In Canada, our investment business, which was helps pension funds manage to get the returns for their employees for the long run, because of the volatility in the markets, it had more work than we knew what to do with. Instead of hiring from the outside, we transferred people from my business, the career business, the human capital consulting business, into our investment business. It never would have been done before, right? Our investment colleagues were no, exactly. Our investment colleagues could not believe how talented and how capable these people from another line of business were. These people from the other line of business had never thought about a career investments before, were super excited. And when demand picked back up, and you've seen this as well, is like we had this we had this deep dip, but then demand for our services have never been so high. They didn't want to come back.
Yeah.
So we had to hire from the outside while our investment business was all good. And so I think it's a long way to start to answer this question. But one of the things about COVID and crisis is it opened up our eyes as to how much we had existing bias and stereotypes about people's skills and what kind of work they could do. As we move forward, another thing that happened in COVID is you saw unemployment drop to record low levels, greatest level of job vacancies in US history, and not for 1 month or two, but literally for 2 years. So there's not enough people to do the work. And so not only that, but the cost of buying talent into an organization also skyrocketed. So even if you could find the talent, you couldn't actually afford to get the talent, which means that you need to turn internally to your build strategy. And at the same time, and so I'm probably carrying on and maybe moving too fast, you've got an emergence of a bunch of technologies that allow you through artificial intelligence to identify or approximate someone's skills and capability profile based on experience. You can do the same with jobs. So you can start to get more granular with the way you think about jobs. And all of a sudden you have possibility to unlock or remove the friction in career movement when you start to think about skills, and you can get much greater outcomes and productivity and higher levels of satisfaction among employees by increasing mobility when you think with a skills lens, or what we'll say a skills-based organization.
So you hinted at it, and I want to go there just for a second. The last truth that I want us to talk about is one that gets into the idea of AI. You just hinted at it. I mentioned it in your in the opening. And the truth in the book is intelligence is being amplified. And I'm confident, having read the book, and I'm talking with Ilya Bonic, one of the co-authors of Work Different, 10 Truths for Winning the People Age, in the People Age. I'm confident you and I can have a long conversation, longer than this podcast, just about AI. That's not really my point here, but I do want you to share this idea of intelligence being amplified to help people get past some of the worry, excuse me, and anxiety.
Yeah. So you can see that there's a play on AI there, so intelligence and amplified. We have a view, as do many others, is that the combination of human plus the generative AI or the artificial intelligence that will come in the past will lead to a better outcome than either as standalone. So this is what we talk about in the book. We also talk about the fact that some will view AI as a friend, others as a foe. If you
just like everybody, pardon me for interrupting you for a second. Just like people have viewed every big technological change. We could go back and say that, not just about the ones in our lifetime. We could say that about television. We could say that about railroads. Like, we could keep going back and saying, is it friend or is it foe? There is fear and there's opportunity. We're seeing it again in real time.
And so here's one of the reasons that I like doing what I do. I think there's never been as important a time for leaders, for the HR organization, to step up and be proactive in addressing both the opportunity and the challenges that will come with AI. I think with our own employees is we need and encourage everyone to use AI every day, because if we fall behind in use of this technology, someone else is going to get ahead. The skills that I need for my career to be sustainable in the future, they're going to fade, and I'm going to be left behind.
That is exactly the conversation I had with my team yesterday. That's exactly the conversation I had with my team yesterday. So you hinted at something. Please go ahead.
No, you go.
No, you hinted at HR, and you talk about this in the book, and I'm curious sort of what you see. The role of HR was different and elevated for most during the pandemic, but now we are post-pandemic. And so what do you see? And so if you've written a book about the people age, if you're positing that we're living in and working in a people age, then how do you see the role of HR, or as senior leaders or executives that might be listening, or HR professionals that might be listening? What advice do you have for them as they think about the role of HR now and in the future?
I would say that it's really important to keep a focus on ensuring that the skills of the workforce are going to keep pace with developments in work, so that we can do our best to keep the careers of our colleagues sustainable. There's not enough people to do the work today, let alone what will be required in the future. So that's an important responsibility. The other is, I think it's really important to have a business lens on everything you do, and that means balance. So one of the things about the book is it's easy to go through and say, hey, these truths, yes, they might be obvious. It's a nice way to talk about them. And is the thesis that if you follow all the truths, you'll be in a good place? Not necessarily, because there needs to be a business lens. We also talk about the sustainability, right? You can't deliver on the people agenda and opportunity unless you're delivering on the business outcomes.
100%.
Similarly, you can't deliver on the business outcomes unless you're delivering on the people piece. And for me personally, if I was in the HR organization, I would dive deep into AI and do anything I could to ensure that my organization and my people are getting access to not only the best tools, but also that I'm building a culture of AI. And by that, I mean, on one hand, you've got access to tools, but the tools won't give anything unless they're being used. So how do I maximize the adoption of the tools that I make available to colleagues? The theory is that there'll be a 5 to 20% increase in productivity for anyone who's using generative AI. And then there's a whole leapfrogging you can do if you want to be disruptive in your application of AI. But think about that, 5 to 20%. If my workforce falls behind and doesn't use those tools, my organization becomes 5 to 20% less competitive.
Yep.
I very quickly start to decline relative to the competitors who are moving in this direction, and they will. So there's no time to be wasted. So I would just really, really encourage to jump on the AI agenda and get proactive to ensure that our workforce is sustainable for the future.
Yeah, I love that, and I think the only thing that I would add to that is we have to get people have access to tools and using tools, encourage use of tools, and all of that, and then I think we have to help them think about it more than just, oh, I can do it to do this thing today, but help them think about that maybe not the full leapfrog of a strategic in the organization, but like starting to think about, okay, like how could we really fundamentally shift the work in a way that serves the business and me as an individual as well.
Right. And there's a cultural shift for organizations. What we've found is when employees talk about AI and their views on it, actually the majority are open to using the technology. They're not so scared. But one common question is, well, if I use this and increase productivity, who gets the productivity gain? What happens with that extra time? And I think what we should be doing is just sharing the gain. Like, part of it goes to the organization, part of it should go back into a reinvestment in skills development, or creating the time for people to be curious, to experiment, to do more than they could before, and we'll all end in a better spot, right?
That is absolutely, I think, where part of the leapfrog becomes, is if I as an individual have now figured out how to do my work 10% faster, if you want to think about it that way, then it's like, how do we think about how do we now maximize results? Not just systematize and speed up the execution of, but how do we start to maximize? Augment is that word that you guys used earlier. So we need to move on, and I've got a couple more things I like to always ask our guests. So I'm going to shift gears on you, and I'm going to ask you what you do for fun. What do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? I like to play tennis. I'm struggling a little because I have sciatica from all the travel I've been doing this year. And I have, I'm married. I have a daughter who's 20, son who's 16, going on 17. So I like to hang out with them as much as I can. They're both away from home. It's Christmas. They've come home. So looking forward to spending good time with family.
I am right with you on that. And so I don't have to ask you the tennis or pickleball question. You're in the tennis camp. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is it? And you knew I was going to ask you this. Like, what are you reading these days?
So there's two books. One leads to the other, and your theme of AI or intelligence amplified prompts this. I'm reading a book called I, Human by Thomas Chamorro-Premosic. And Kevin, just like you, he wrote this book before ChatGPT was exposed to the world in November. You wrote your book about long distance management before COVID. Perfect timing though. He's a psychologist, and he looks at everything through a psychological lens. So the thesis of the book is that AI has the potential to change lives either for the better or the worse. it's got the potential to amplify the worst parts of humans, like selfishness, distraction, narcissism, predictability, impatience, and the like. But then there's the other side of curiosity, adaptability, empathy, humility that we need to balance. And that reflects my interest in AI. It's not just AI for the purpose of building business and careers and the like, but how do you get it right? It's a super complicated one. And that took me to another book, because where does this name I, Human? It sounds familiar. I, Robot, Isaac Asimov, written in the 1950s. So I downloaded it, listened to it. It's an incredible good book. First Asimov book I've ever read. It's got incredible insights about man and machine and the complications that go with it, and so many lessons to be learned as we go into, I guess, this next iteration of work and the next iteration of life, with artificial intelligence being a key component of it.
I love that. I have not read it, but I bet I will now. And here's why, because I think that so often people want to find, and both of us as authors love it when people want to find the newest book on something.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, if we'll go back 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, we will get insights that are every bit, that will still ring true and may help us see things in a way that we haven't thought of, or in the moment we're not seeing or able to see. Even the wisest authors of today might not quite see. So I love that. I, Human and I, Robot are the books. We'll have those in the show notes for you, everybody. Here's the question that you most want me to ask, however, though, is where can people learn more about what you're doing? Where can they find you? Where can they get the book? I'll hold it up while you talk about it. Again, Work Different, 10 Truths for Winning in the People Age. Where do you want to point people? What do they need to know?
Wherever you buy your favorite business books, and Mercer.com.
And Mercer.com, that's for sure. So I appreciate that. Before we go, everybody, I have a question for all of you. It's the question of application. And so we've spent the last 30 plus minutes talking about some ideas about work differently, about the people age, about how we need to adapt and adjust as leaders and as organizations to be more effective. And so the only real question that matters here is, now what? What will you do as a result of what you've learned? Whatever items that you took from this, and rather than sharing what mine are, and I've got notes that I wrote as we were chatting, the question is, what are you going to do with what you just learned? There's something that you heard that leads you to a next step. If you just let that go past, like when this podcast ends, then you won't have gotten nearly as much from this than if you decide now to take that action. I hope that you will do that. Ilya, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you. I enjoyed the book. Please tell Kate and Kai that I appreciate their work as well. And thanks so much for being here.
Great, I will.
And so everybody, if you are here for the first time, welcome. You need to come back. And if you've been here before, you already know that back means next week. So wherever you're listening or consuming this podcast, I hope that you will like it and share it and all those things. You know what to do. And then you'll be back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.